Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm your host, Brando. And, so it's been a minute since we've talked about this Kratom situation going on with the government, with the FDA. The FDA don't like Kratom. The FDA doesn't like marijuana, medical marijuana. Apparently the FDA is on board with CBD not being scheduled. I'll talk about that in another video. But the DEA ain't having any of that. Now when it comes to Kratom, we have the American Kratom Association has been petitioning the FDA to have a sit down and chat with them. And of course the FDA has just been stonewalling on this. And it's just kind of like an ongoing thing where the American Kratom Association has been reaching out to NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And furthermore, the FDA, specifically the FDA's head, Scott Gottlieb, who sat on the board of 8 pharma companies. Need I say more? Speaking of corruption, the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, and like everything in the Trump administration when it comes to appointments, this guy is just as much of a piece of shit as, for example, Scott Pruitt over at EPA, or whoever, let's pick Rick Scott for freaking Energy Commission. I mean, Trump's cabinet picks really are just kind of like this thing where they're like, who's the worst possible person we can put in this position? And there it is, So who's this guy? This guy, he goes from the government at Health and Human Services to back to Lilly, the Pharma corporation. Government Lilly. Every time he goes back to the government, he gets a higher position. And every time he goes back to Lilly, he gets a higher position until he's the director of Lilly. And then after that, he graduated, and now he's the director of Health and Human Services. I mean, I could tell you more. There's a pretty good article about it right here. I think I'll just go ahead and put a link to all the articles that I used today in the description in case anybody wants to read any further into any of this. So anyway, he's talking about the new drug war that the Trump administration has started up. Since the beginning of the administration, POTUS has made combating the opioid epidemic a top priority. HHS Gov developed a 5-point strategy to tackle this crisis, and just recently awarded more than $1 billion in funding to support efforts in communities across America. I can't imagine that anything good's going to come out of that. Then he says, the bipartisan opioid legislation passed by Congress today provides necessary tools to expand our work by increasing access to medication-assisted treatment. More opioids. And spurring innovative research for alternatives to opioids for pain management. In other words, he's going to call the Sacklers up and say, hey, you guys want a couple more sacks of money? Here we go. And then he also says that they are going to, something about new treatments for opioid use disorder. So that's just more sacks of money for the Sacklers. As we already heard, and if you didn't know this by now, the Sackler was given patents to combat opioid addiction, whatever that means. All right, he's coming up with a patent for supposedly a non-addictive opioid for pain, and then another one that's supposedly a patent for, his own version of not Seroquel, but Suboxone. And another thing that they're doing over at Purdue Pharma is they're taking like Narcan or whatever it is, that the revive drug, and they're putting it in painkillers, so that supposedly that's going to make it so you don't get addicted to the painkiller. I have no idea, man. These guys with their synthetics and their weird things that they're doing with opiates, they got to get shut down. How do we keep rewarding these criminals for all this bullshit? I don't know. Anyway, that's a whole nother video. But so what he's saying here is that they were looking for alternatives to opioids for pain management. We got it right here. So I tweeted, "We have your alternatives, cannabis and kratom. Now leave us out of your chemical warfare bullshit." And yeah, I had to debut a couple of memes that I just made. So kratom has been used for thousands of years by millions of people without any deaths. And then we have an old meme. 92% of patients say medical marijuana works. And that's serious medical conditions, including chronic pain, arthritis, migraines, and cancer. And if you look into the history of kratom, I found this over at the National Institute on Health. If you dig down into their databases and stuff, they have this Biomed Research International report, and it's basically the history of kratom. And it talks about what kratom, different studies that they've already done on this. And basically, right here it says, where was that? Right here. So, traditionally in certain regions of Southeast Asia, the chopped or fresh dried leaves of the tree are chewed or made into a tea by local manual laborers to combat fatigue and improve work productivity. In addition, kratom preparations have also been used for centuries during socio-religious ceremonies and to treat various medical conditions such as morphine dependence in Thailand. And that's sourced, in case you didn't know. And then as an opium substitute in Malaya, it has been suggested that the genus was given to Mitragyna, named by the Dutch botanist Corthals because the leaves and the stamens of the flowers and the plant resemble the shape of a bishop's mitre. Considering the variety of uses, it could be speculated that the term derives from the Mithraic cults, seen as a source of spiritual transcendence for thousands of years. Alright, enough on all this. So what's going on anyway? So the American Kratom Association also put out a little video talking about how NIDA basically made a statement about kratom. And I'm going to go ahead and read that. Let's get that later. So I'm going to go ahead and read this whole piece here, in case you didn't know about this. This came out on September 24th, which is about a week ago. So the American Kratom Association today called upon the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to recall its recommendation to make the botanical a Schedule I drug after the National Institute on Drug Abuse confirmed that it is illegal. It is the illegal adulteration of kratom with other substances that is responsible for the deaths cited by the FDA in its recommendation. To me, that's huge. It's right in line with, well, the last video I made about kratom was talking about how NIDA and the FDA was at odds with the deaths because the National Institute on Drug Abuse's website is supposed to tell you about trends in drug abuse and dangers that are out there on the street so that people can be aware of things that are actually dangerous. They're not going to just go out and start slamming kratom on their description page for kratom just because the FDA is touting these deaths without looking into them themselves. Or maybe they were, because what it looked like and what I was reporting on was it was starting to look like they were evolving towards the kratom deaths being legitimate without, because nobody was contesting their little changes that they were making on their webpage about Kratom. And then people started contesting their changes that they were making on their webpage about Kratom, including the American Kratom Association, who basically, put the question to them. And so NIDA came up with a statement. Following confirmation from NIDA last week that it is the deliberate and illegal adulteration of Kratom that has resulted in the deaths claimed by the FDA, aka requested that the Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary of Health, Brett Giroir, MD, immediately recall the scheduling recommendation from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, and direct the FDA to implement a complete reevaluation of the science on Kratom. NIDA's conclusion came after a 2-month review of the scientific data on the safety of Kratom and prompted the following statement, and this is from NIDA. Quote, in 2017, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, began issuing a series of warnings about Kratom and now identifies at least 44 deaths related to its use, with at least one case being investigated as possible use of pure Kratom. Most Kratom-associated deaths appear to have resulted from adulterated products, other drugs mixed in with the Kratom, or taking Kratom along with other potent substances, including illicit drugs, opioids, benzodiazepines, alcohol, gabapentin, and over-the-counter medications such as cough syrup. Also, there have been some reports of Kratom packaged as dietary supplements or dietary ingredients that were laced with other compounds that caused deaths. Emphasis added. Quote, there is not a single instance in the history of the DEA scheduling where a substance was banned because it had been deliberately adulterated with a separate deadly drug, wrote Dave Herman, chairman of the American Kratom Association, in a letter to Assistant Secretary Giroir. Let me get this. Giroir, calling upon HHS to formally request the recall of Kratom scheduling recommendation from the DEA. Congress never intended for the Controlled Substances Act to be used to ban substances that were deliberately adulterated with other toxic or deadly drugs that cause deaths, and nothing in the statute or the legislative history permits this abuse of discretion in the scheduling recommendations initiated by the FDA. NIDA reports the FDA claims that there is at least one case reported by the FDA that is being investigated as possible use of pure Kratom. Herman strongly challenged that claim by saying, quote, the FDA made that statement on its investigation into pure Kratom death on February 6, 2018, and now more than 7 months later, there is not any corroborating evidence produced by the FDA to validate that claim. In his letter, Herman strongly objected to the FDA's public attacks against Kratom and its sustained disinformation campaign alleging deaths associated with Kratom. The FDA appears to be deliberately violating the provisions of the Information Quality Act by widely disseminating incomplete, inaccurate, biased, and unreproducible information to local medical examiners, and coroners, incorrectly blaming Kratom for deaths that were actually caused by polydrug use or deliberately adulterated Kratom products. In extrapolating the data to faulty conclusion in an effort to place Kratom as a Schedule 1 substance under the CSA, the FDA's logic would require the prohibition of caffeinated products, including even Coca-Cola and coffee, because someone deliberately laced those products with potent substances, including illicit drugs, opioids, benzodiazepines, alcohol, gabapentin, and over-the-counter medications such as cough syrup. In fact, it could be applied to anything, even broccoli, once it has been contaminated with a dangerous substance, Herman concluded. NIDA's conclusion, following its extensive review of whether a person can overdose on Kratom, clearly documents that pure Kratom or natural Kratom does not present a public health risk under the criteria for scheduling set by the CSA, and the FDA already has ample statutory authority to seize all dangerous, adulterated, and counterfeit products. So basically, come on, FDA. Your job is to make sure that the public has safe products. It seems like we're living in the opposite world where you actually are approving the products that are deadly and dangerous and all this stuff. You know, I got this report here that talks about drugs in Ohio. And when I see what I'm looking at here is all these drugs that that are synthetic opioids, all right? And it's like, you know, this is just a small little slice of the synthetic opioid list. You know what I mean? Like, there's way more than that. And each one of these has a generic, and each one of these has multiple dose level pills that are all famous in their own right. And then you also have the tranquilizers like the benzodiazepines and such. There's a list of them here. And then you have the sleeping pills and that kind of shit like these over here. These are all synthetic drugs that is made out of thin air in a lab that didn't exist before. Now they do because there's patents and companies that produce them ad nauseum. And each one of these has a kill count. Like, you go into Vicodin and there's millions of people that have died from Vicodins over the years. I don't know about millions, but definitely it's over 100,000, I'm sure, by now. And you go all the way down the list and there's people that have died from every fucking one of these. But somehow they're the ones that get approved. They're the ones that are considered safe, and we're going to be okay with those. That's the kind of backwards ass bullshit we're dealing with. While Kratom, never been a death. Never been a death. Thousands of years. Here they are out in the fields in Southeast Asia, processing plants in these gigantic processing areas. Millions of people have used Kratom, maybe even billions, and nobody's ever died from it that we know of. And the FDA sitting on some bullshit talking about people dying from it. They have not produced any actual proof. This is all speculation. Nobody can look at any of those 44 death claims and say anything other than, you're full of shit, Scott. You are just full of fucking shit. We can't. It's embarrassing how corrupt this process that you're going through is, and how you're just ignoring reality and existing in this bubble that you, as the FDA, are creating about Kratom. This bubble of misinformation and ignorance that you think you could do, which you can't do, because we have the facts. We have the science on our side. We have study after study that proves that Kratom is safe and effective. We have study after study that you don't have that proves it's dangerous. You don't have a causal relationship between somebody that died and had Kratom in their system and Kratom. You don't have that at all. You know you don't. And you keep pushing this like you do, but you don't. And we know what you're doing. It's just so you have all this on the public record. And maybe farther down the road in history, people might look back and they'll be like, oh, everything was on the up and up. They banned that Kratom shit and got rid of it forever. And all the people that used to take Kratom are now dead because they eventually died or committed suicide or died of an overdose from opioids that are FDA approved. And if you are 11 years old and you need OxyContin, don't worry. The FDA approved that for you. So the American Kratom Association announced its recommended standards for Kratom manufacturers and vendors on July 18th, 2018 to promote self-regulation in the Kratom industry so that consumers could identify vendors who meet or exceed FDA good manufacturing processes. Yeah, and what have anybody heard of any Kratom deaths since then that were like from commercially packaged thing where they bought it and they didn't add nothing to it themselves, but somehow they died and then they tested the Kratom later that they bought and there was something else in that kratom and that's why they died? No, because vendors aren't stupid out there. The American Kratom Association is a consumer-based nonprofit organization that advocates to protect the freedom of consumers to safely consume natural kratom as a part of their personal health and well-being regimen. AKA represents nearly 5 million Americans who consume kratom safely each year. Okay. And, you know, when we talk about this drug war 2.0 that this Health and Human Services guy is talking about, keep in mind that the SISTA Act was included in this bill, this package of bills that was flying through the Senate. And while it was over there, getting ready to head over to the House before the Senate put their stamp on it, and it's a package of several bills that are going to be, you know, they're all really far-reaching, and I'm probably going to be forced to do a report on it when it gets signed into law, who knows when. But when you look at that, the SISTA Act was not included. And the SISTA Act, in case you don't know what the SISTA Act is, it basically gives the, you know, the person that's Jeff Sessions just ridiculous power, or, you know, between the people in the bureaucracies, whether it's the FDA or the Department of Justice or the Health and Human Services or NIDA, National Institute on Health is the overall umbrella, the top of the umbrella that they all fall under. If the SISTA Act passes, which it still could, it just wasn't included in this package of bills, which would have made it pass a lot easier. Now that it has to be done on its own, it's going to be a little harder to get that through. Hopefully. I mean, the government is so freaking corrupt right now, it's hard to imagine it not passing. I mean, it's freaking bipartisan right off the bat, and the most powerful Democrats and the most powerful Republicans are the ones pushing it. So that kind of tells me that it's going to pass. Anyway, this came out right after all that noise. Our lobbyists just called. This is, again, the American Kratom Association. Our lobbyists just called. So I wanted to share with you some great news, and it was because of your outreach over the last few days that the Senate has stood firm and decided that the SISTA will not be added to the other opioid legislation. I've been truly humbled as I've seen the outpouring of action from the Kratom community with thousands of emails and phone calls flooding Capitol Hill. You sent a loud message to lawmakers that they need to oppose SISTA, and your voices were heard. Earlier this evening, I spoke with a staff member on the Hill who commented that they were shocked how many people reached out to the Senate about Kratom. His exact words, "The Kratom folks sure know how to fight." He's absolutely right. All right, so that's awesome, guys. Just keep up the pressure on lawmakers whenever anything's coming up, especially, I mean, keep the pressure on Scott Gottlieb. Gee, that's you know, I'm right there helping out with the replies to his tweets about Kratom, which always garner 100 or more replies, all for Kratom. I don't know how he's got any likes over here on this crap, but the like to comment ratio usually will tell you a story. And usually people are just sharing this because they're commenting and putting it on their timeline and lambasting it. So you might as well just throw those shares right over here to this side, and now you're looking like you have over 100 more people that didn't like this shit than these actual hearts, which probably aren't really all likes anyway. How can anyone like this cringy bullshit? And what is this cringy bullshit that Scott Gottlieb is pushing today? The Ohio Board of Pharmacy voted to classify Kratom as a Schedule I controlled substance, citing no proven medical use. Agency was, quote, especially concerned about mixing Kratom with opioids since both drugs activate opioid receptors and Kratom has been marketed as an opioid substitute. That's the most ignorant thing I've ever heard of right there. Like, in that sentence, you have made yourself and the person who made this quote originally, the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, you look totally stupid. Like, why would you mix kratom if it was supposed to be like activating opioid receptors with opioids? Everybody that's taken opioids before knows that once you activate the receptors, there's really nothing else you can do except for wait until you can do it again. And besides that, I don't know. It's just everything the Ohio board has said sounds like they actually don't have any idea what they're fucking talking about. And we're about to see what that is. I said Ohio and other states have proven that they are complicit in the FDA's misinformation campaign against kratom. There is zero evidence from any cases you have presented or any state coroner that concludes that kratom was the cause of even one death. Whoa. Right here, okay. More tweets in his thread. According to the Inquirer, the board concluded kratom has a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use and isn't safe to use in medical treatment and poses a public health risk. 6 other states and the District of Columbia have banned kratom. Now, that's actually not true. They tried to ban kratom in D.C. and it didn't go through. Somebody might have said something about that down here. Anyway, you can look at the comments yourself on his feed. Even things that aren't even related to kratom get Gottlieb kratom stuff. So more on this Ohio ban, and this is just obscene and absurd how ignorant this is. So, and Ohio's been, totally complicit all along in reporting kratom deaths that we know are not actually kratom deaths. So coroners are actually lying to try to help bolster this, misinformation campaign. And when you have a misinformation campaign that feeds from corruption in the government, people in the mainstream media that are willing to basically say whatever the people they know cut their checks, essentially, are going to want them to say. So it ain't even like someone sits people down in a room and are like, hey guys, we're going to do this thing and we're going to demonize kratom, blah, blah, blah. They don't have to do all that. All they have to do is say the thing that they want to say, and all these other people will just snap to attention and start getting it done. If the politician says kratom's killing people, then, I'm sure there's going to be a coroner somewhere that's just ass-kissy enough to, do the bidding. So we're going to read this here real quick. At a time when many pain sufferers are turning to natural supplements to relieve their pain, the state of Ohio is moving to ban 2 of the most popular ones. And this is Pain News Network, by the way, by Pat Anson, Pain News Network editor. The Ohio Board of Pharmacy voted Monday to classify kratom as a Schedule I controlled substance alongside heroin, LSD, and other dangerous drugs. The move came 2 months after the board issued an advisory warning that the sales of CBD-infused products are illegal under Ohio's new medical marijuana program. As in, all right, this is a new trend that I'm seeing across the country. If you live in a state where you have a medical marijuana program and you can buy marijuana, and there's people that grow CBD-heavy marijuana plants that are more THC than CBD, or if it is, it still has more THC than what would be qualified as hemp, which is very little to no THC. So, all that being said, if you live in a state where there's no medical marijuana laws at all, hemp CBD hasn't been banned. But if you live in a place where there is a medical marijuana program, they're banning the hemp CBD, so you have to go through the registration process and pay the taxes and the high prices at the dispensary for the the regulated marijuana with CBD in it, or CBD in the products or whatever. So this is totally not free market. This is totally I don't know. There's no like form of government that describes this level of bullshit where they just like, okay, we're going to make a decision that this stuff is like, we know it's not Schedule 1 material. We know it ain't. We know there's no reason to ban the sale of CBD infused products at all. 100% there's no reason to. But since we know people are making money and we want to make that money, it's corruption, dude. I'm so sick of it. The Pharmacy Board considers kratom, which comes from the leaves of the trees that grow in Southeast Asia, a psychoactive plant that can cause hallucinations, psychosis, seizures, and death. So when like I said, you have this propaganda, these propaganda talking points, they come from the government and then the mainstream media pushes them, and then they come back around to the coroners, use them in their reports, and then the Pharmacy Board gets a hold of them, and everybody's just shaking each other's hands and passing money around in envelopes. And they're doing this all because of companies like Purdue Pharma and Incest Therapeutics and anybody else that deals in deadly opioids and things that are supposed to get you off of opioids. Like the Sackler family just got all these contracts to make all these anti-addiction drugs and opioids that don't make you addicted to them and all this shit. They don't need the competition. So if you don't think that these actions are getting carried out by the lapdogs of the Sackler family, you either bumped your head or you just haven't ever paid attention to what's going on with the government and Big Pharma. And the Sackler family is the freaking biggest thing in Big Pharma as far as America goes when it comes to the opioids. State health officials have identified 6 recent deaths in Ohio, which kratom was indicated as the primary cause of death. Now, that's some bullshit. Even that statement in itself, indicated as the primary cause of death. So if there was more than one thing that was the cause of death, how is kratom the primary? It's not. Since it can't kill you, it can't be the primary cause of death. It just can't. You, as a coroner, you have to at least tell us why you think that 6 people died because of kratom. That's the highest number we've heard. That had to be a bad batch that was laced with fentanyl. And then in that situation, you would be like, okay, it was the fentanyl that killed those people. Not in the opposite world. Not when you're talking about kratom. Because the kratom is now that's the new thing. It's the leafer madness that we all heard about. A recent report from the Ohio Substance Abuse Monitoring Network raised the demonization of kratom to a new level by comparing it to heroin and falsely claiming it was common for people to inject kratom. So here we have a bold-faced lie. And not even just a bold-faced lie, but one that defies logic and is impossible. I am pretty positive, with 100% certainty, that it is not even possible to intravenously inject kratom. Because first of all, how do you even do it? Kratom isn't, let's see, is this easily accessed? Yeah, right here. See what this is? This tells you what's in kratom. So, yeah. You can't, that's not, I don't, you know what, guys, I don't even know. I wish I had something funny or something to say about that, but that's just, it's beyond, like, comprehension that you would even, like, how are you doing this? Well, I'll tell you why, because it's like this report. That's what this is, this report that I just mentioned. It's, they grabbed a bunch of people who they sent out into the field, and I don't know, how many people did they send out in the field? I don't know. I'll put a link to this thing in there. Man, if you really want to blow your mind on how ridiculous these people are, you can check this shit out. And, you know, I mean, when we're talking about things like the illicit use of Suboxone, that just means that you bought the Suboxone on the street instead of through the pharmacy. It still had to come out of the fucking manufacturer somehow. No one stole truckloads of Suboxone, and no one's making it in the lab clandestine. It's not happening. So this report is ridiculous. It's absurd. And obviously the people that went out in the field were lying their asses off about Kratom and many other things. Participants reported, this is quote, participants reported that the drug looks similar to brown powdered heroin. Produces similar effects as heroin. No. And is primarily used by individuals subject to drug screening and by people addicted to heroin who use the drug to alleviate opioid withdrawal symptoms. Both of those might be true. And why is that a problem? Why would that be a problem by people that are afraid to get pissed out on heroin, or someone that might want to alleviate withdrawal? That's literally what people are doing, you know, swearing by. Why don't you listen to them? Participants reported that the most common route of administration for Kratom is intravenous injection, aka shooting. No, it ain't. It just ain't. The most common way that people use Kratom is make tea out of it because it tastes like shit. So there's no way you're going to inject that shit. Participants in the Akron-Canton region estimated that out of 10 Kratom users, 7 would shoot the drug and 3 would orally consume the drug, including drinking it as a tea. Well, at least they got the tea part right, but the 7 out of 10 part, come on, man. Monday's vote by the Pharmacy Board starts a month-long process of drafting new regulations for Kratom. Public comments will be accepted until October 18th. Over 1,500 comments have already been received, most of them from Kratom users, asking the board to keep the supplement legal. The findings of the Ohio Board of Pharmacy parrot the false propaganda of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and their crusade to ban Kratom, said David Herman, chairman of the American Kratom Association, which represents Kratom vendors and consumers. Quote, the FDA has flooded state regulators, including the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, with false claims and disinformation about the addiction profile and safety of this safe botanical plant. Quote, the nearly 5 million Kratom consumers and tens of thousands of Ohio citizens who safely consume Kratom as part of their health and well-being regimen should not have that freedom infringed upon by any regulation that is premised on bad science, inaccurate data provided by the FDA, and deliberate attempts to manipulate the scheduling process by a federal agency. Kratom has been used for centuries as a pain relief and stimulant, particularly in rural areas of Indonesia and Thailand. In recent years, millions of Americans have discovered Kratom and started buying it online or in head shops as a treatment for pain, addiction, anxiety, and depression. The Food and Drug Administration maintains that Kratom is not approved for any medical use and insists on calling the plant an opioid, although its active ingredients are mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine, 2 alkaloids that act on opioid receptors in the brain. Kratom is already banned in Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Vermont, Wisconsin, and the District of Columbia. There is speculation that the FDA and DEA may also seek to classify Kratom as a Schedule I controlled substance, which would make sales and possession of the plant illegal nationwide. The DEA withdrew a plan to ban Kratom in 2016 after public outcry. So, a little bit again, DC did not ban, so I'm not sure where they got that from. CBD sales banned. So as a bonus, Ohio, it wasn't enough for them to crack down on Kratom, but they want to be the FDA's good little lapdog. Good boy. Come here, boy. Good boy. Ohio's crackdown on CBD sales is not as restrictive as the ban on Kratom. CBD-infused products such as edibles, tinctures, and oils usually contain little or no THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana that makes people high. Many people use CBD to relieve pain and help them sleep. Under the state law, marijuana is defined as all parts of the genus cannabis, and only state-licensed dispensaries can sell products made with CBD. This will eventually be 58 dispensaries across the state, although none are expected to open until late this year. So basically, there ain't even nowhere to go to buy CBD if they do this. However, here we see some retailers pulled CBD products from their shelves after the warning from the Pharmacy Board, but many have chosen to sell their product supplies off first. One retailer in the Dayton predicts the price of CBD products will soar once they are no longer widely available, which is too bad because it's already overpriced in many people's opinion, because the price of CBD products mimics the price of black market marijuana products that get you high. And that's just fucking absurd, because you need to take a whole lot more CBD than just a tenth of a gram here and a fucking half a gram there to relieve pain and stuff that's, you know, so it's insane that we already see prices that we've seen. But if this is true what he's saying, yeah, of course the prices are going to go up. Quote, the prices, if they're going to skyrocket, are going to hurt customers' pockets. Rabbi Ahmed told WHIO.com, senior citizens mostly buy the CBD. The young kids, they don't buy CBD at all. A spokesman for the Pharmacy Board said there are no state plans to enforce the ban on CBD sales, although local law enforcement agencies could. Also unclear is how the ban will affect online sales and shipments from out-of-state vendors. Quote, the public should have uninhibited access to hemp-derived products no matter what state you live in. We will continue to produce these products and support our retailers and customers through this moment of confusion, Nick Balzar, CEO of QC Infusion, a Cincinnati-based manufacturer of CBD products, told Cincinnati.com. And, you know, yeah. That's all I got on this. I'm going to leave a link to this. I'm going to leave a link to where you can go comment on this Ohio situation. I'm surprised I didn't have a link to that here in this article. Well, there is 129 comments. Anywhere you go look at this, man, it's just crazy. Everybody wants to know what's going on with the CBD. Everybody wants to know what's going on with the FDA. And everybody's pissed off that this is happening, that they're trying to ban Kratom. Like, give me a break. And, of course, it's because, you know, when the right-wingers take over the government, man, they take to the drug war with a fury and vengeance. So we're looking down the barrel of the drug war 2.0. I'll do a video when that begins, the exact date. And fortunately, it doesn't involve the SISTA Act yet, but it does involve the FDA going after Kratom and CBD, and states like Ohio and others are being complicit in this misinformation campaign. The good news for CBD is that the FDA actually isn't totally opposed to it, and like I said, I'll do a video about this maybe, or talk about it in another video, but they sent a letter to the DEA saying, we don't think that CBD really, should be on Schedule 1. But the DEA is not budging. Alright, that's all I got, guys. Sorry I took this out so, carried it out so long, but if you're new here, you just swung by and you checked out this video and you thought, well, this is a pretty cool video. It was informative and whatever. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button, man. It can't hurt. And hit the like button if you like the video on your way out. Peace out and have a good one, guys. I have no words.